Welcome to Case Vault, where every case has a crack, a contradiction, a missed clue, a detail that should not be there. Today we're looking at the con man who sold the Eiffel Tower, twice, to two different buyers, and the one thing the people closest to it never noticed. Paris, spring of 1925. A man in a tailored suit checks into one of the most expensive hotels in the city. He is alone, handsome, soft-spoken, a leather briefcase in one hand. Inside it, forged government stationery, official seals, a gold fountain pen, a list of names, and a title that doesn't belong to him. He's about to invite a handful of scrap metal dealers to a private meeting. He's going to tell them the French government has decided to tear down the Eiffel Tower, and he's going to sell it to one of them. The part that matters isn't the sale. It's what happened after. The man who bought the Eiffel Tower figured it out within days. He knew he'd been conned, and he never called the police. That silence is the crack in this case, and it's the reason the con man came back to Paris and tried to do it all over again. His name was Victor Lustig, born the 4th of January 1890 in Hostin, a small town in Bohemia, then part of Austria-Hungary. His father was a tobacco salesman and former mayor. Nothing in the family suggested what the son would become. By his early 20s, Lustig was working the transatlantic ocean liners running between Europe and America. Not as crew, not as a passenger, as a predator. He'd board in first class and find wealthy travelers over dinner. He'd study them for days. By the end of the crossing, he'd have their trust and their money. The ocean was his office. The dining room was his stage. His signature trick was a device called the Romanian box, a polished mahogany cabinet about the size of a bread box with two brass slots and a set of dummy levers on the side. Here's how it worked. Lustig would feed a real banknote into one slot. He'd crank the levers with ceremony. Then he'd tell the mark to wait several hours for the chemical process to finish. Hours later, he'd open the second slot. Out came a perfect bill. Same denomination, same paper, same ink, real currency. The mark had just watched a machine duplicate money, except it hadn't. The second bill was pre-loaded inside the box before the demonstration started. The mahogany was a magician's prop. The levers were for show. The entire gimmick was a waiting game, and Lustig made the wait feel like alchemy. The mark never saw the setup. All they saw was a machine that printed money. They'd pay thousands for it, sometimes tens of thousands. And when the pre-loaded bills ran out, the box produced nothing but blank paper. By then, Lustig was already gone. New city, new name, new hotel, new mark. He carried the box across the Atlantic and back. He sold it to businessmen, ranchers, and at least one Texas sheriff who chased him across state lines. He used dozens of aliases over the years. In May of 1922, he posed as a man named Robert Duval in Springfield, Missouri, walked into a bank, stole $10,000 in cash and Liberty bonds. Then he vanished. The pattern was always the same. Read the mark, mirror what they expect to see, take the money, disappear. But the Eiffel Tower job wasn't another box con. It was bigger. It was theater on a national stage. In 1925, Lustig read a newspaper article about the Eiffel Tower. The tower was 36 years old, built for the 1889 World's Fair, intended to stand for 20 years and then come down. Now it was a decade past its planned expiration date, and the city didn't quite know what to do with it. The article described the structure's poor condition. Rust was spreading through the iron lattice. Paint was peeling constantly. The maintenance bill grew every year. Some officials, the article suggested, weren't sure the tower was worth the trouble. Lustig read that line and saw an opening the size of a national monument. If the government was already struggling with upkeep, why not make people believe it wanted to sell? Not the land, not the views, the metal. 7,000 tons of iron, sold as scrap to the highest bidder. He hired a forger to produce stationery from the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. The letterhead was crisp. The seals were exact. The paper was the same weight a real ministry would use. He gave himself the title of Deputy Director General, senior enough to command respect, obscure enough that nobody would recognize the real man who held the job. Then he booked a suite at one of the grandest hotels in Paris, the kind of room with high ceilings, heavy curtains, and room service that brought tea on a silver tray. The kind of room that told visitors this man was important. The invitations went out to a handful of scrap metal dealers. The letters were formal and the tone was urgent. The government, the letter said, had made a quiet decision to dismantle the Eiffel Tower. A select group of businessmen were being invited to bid on the scrap metal rights. The process would be confidential. The government didn't want public outrage over tearing down a national symbol. That secrecy was the second lock on the con. It stopped the dealers from calling the ministry to confirm. It stopped them from talking to each other. It made every man in the room feel like he was holding a secret too valuable to share. The dealers came to the hotel. They sat in the suite. They listened to Lustig present himself as a senior official, managing a sensitive demolition project, and Lustig watched them. He wasn't looking for the smartest dealer in the room. He wasn't looking for the richest. He was looking for the one who wanted it the most, the one who needed to prove something. The man who sat a little too straight when the Eiffel Tower was mentioned. The man whose eyes flicked to the other dealers when a number was named, checking to see if they looked impressed. Lustig had studied that look on ocean liners for a decade. He knew it when he saw it. If you can already see how shame is doing half the work for him, hit subscribe. The second half of this con is even uglier. He found André Poisson, a dealer who was relatively new to the business, eager to land a contract that would elevate his standing. Poisson wanted to be taken seriously. His wife was already suspicious. That combination made him the perfect mark. So Lustig arranged a private second meeting with Poisson alone, and at that meeting he did the one thing that sealed it. He asked for a bribe. Think about that for a second. The bribe didn't make Lustig look less official. It made him look more official. In 1925 Paris, a government contract without a little graft was the suspicious thing. A deputy director general who didn't ask for a kickback was probably a fraud. By asking, Lustig was doing exactly what a real corrupt official would do. The bribe made the whole meeting feel dirtier, riskier, and more believable. Poisson's last doubt dissolved. He paid approximately 70,000 francs. The money covered the scrap metal rights and the bribe. Lustig had the cash, and he vanished from Paris. By the time Poisson understood what he'd bought, Lustig was already gone. Lustig took the money and left Paris. He went to Austria. He checked into a hotel, and he waited. He waited for the newspapers. He waited for the police bulletins. He scanned every front page for a story about a man who'd posed as a government official and tried to sell the Eiffel Tower. Nothing came. No headlines, no warrant, no investigation, no knock on the door. Days passed, then weeks. Complete silence. André Poisson had figured it out within days. The ministry letters were fake. The demolition was fiction, and every franc he'd paid was gone. And he said nothing. Not to the police, not to the newspapers, not to a single person outside his own household. This is the crack. Not a fingerprint, not a document trail, not a piece of forensic evidence, a human decision. Poisson was too humiliated to report the crime. Picture the report he'd have to make. He'd have to sit across from a detective and explain out loud in full sentences that he handed 70,000 francs to a stranger in a hotel suite for a monument that was never for sale. He'd have to say he took the man at his word. He'd have to read his wife the newspaper story the next morning and watch her face. For Poisson, who had wanted to be taken seriously more than he had wanted the contract itself, that admission hurt more than the loss. No police report meant no alert. No alert meant no newspaper story. No newspaper story meant no warning to the next group of dealers who might get a confidential letter about scrap metal. That silence had a consequence Poisson couldn't have imagined, because without a warning there was nothing stopping Lustig from doing it again. Weeks later, Lustig went back to Paris. Same con, same story. New group of scrap metal dealers. He printed fresh ministry stationery, booked another hotel suite, and gave the same pitch about dismantling the tower. He found a willing buyer. But this time, the mark went to the police before the sale closed. Lustig got word just in time and fled to the United States. No money changed hands on the second attempt. He'd sold the Eiffel Tower once. He'd nearly sold it twice. The difference between the two attempts was one human emotion. The first buyer was ashamed. The second one wasn't. That is the whole case. Summed up in the distance between two men. One who couldn't say the words out loud. One who picked up the phone. The entire history of a con artist is contained in that gap. In America, Lustig kept working. The cons got bolder. According to his own later account, he once walked up to Al Capone and talked him into fronting $50,000. There's no corroboration from Capone's side. The pitch was a supposed investment deal. Lustig took the money. He put it in a safe deposit box, and then he sat on it for 2 months. Didn't spend a dollar. After 2 months, he walked back to Capone, returned every dollar, told him the deal had fallen through, apologized for wasting his time. Capone, the story goes, was impressed enough to hand Lustig a cash reward on the way out. Lustig walked away with the money and his life. Whether that story is fully true or partly legend, it shows the method. Lustig didn't just lie. He gave people the behavior they expected to see, and he let their own assumptions fill in the rest. By 1930, Lustig had moved beyond scams into industrial crime. He partnered with a pharmacist and engraver named William Watts and a chemist named Tom Shaw, both from Nebraska. Together they built a counterfeiting operation. The target, $100 bills. The notes were good enough to fool banks, good enough to pass through cash registers and deposit windows without raising a flag. Over the next 5 years, the operation pushed high-quality counterfeit bills into the American economy at scale. The fakes circulated widely enough that the Secret Service made Lustig a priority case. The hunt dragged on for years without a clean lead. Lustig moved constantly. He changed names. He kept the circle small and the investigators chasing shadows. The break didn't come from detective work. It came from jealousy. Billy May, Lustig's mistress, called the Secret Service and told them where he was. She told them everything. On the 10th of May, 1935, agents arrested Victor Lustig in New York City. A locker key in his pocket led them to a storage locker near Times Square. Inside, $51,000 in counterfeit bills. And the printing plates. The plates were everything. They were proof of an operation that had been running for half a decade. Without them, Lustig might have walked. They held him at the Federal House of Detention in Manhattan, a jail most people called the Tombs. The day before his trial, Lustig faked an illness. He used a rope to climb out. He was gone. He lasted 27 days. Agents tracked him to Pittsburgh and brought him back in handcuffs. The escape cost him 15 years for the counterfeiting, 5 more for the escape, 20 years total. They sent him to Alcatraz, the rock in the bay. The place they put the people they never wanted to lose again. No more aliases, no more boxes, no more towers to sell. Most con artists get one good story. Lustig filled a career with them. If you want to see how the next one cracked, subscribe to Case Vault. New episodes drop twice a week. Victor Lustig died on the 11th of March, 1947. He was at the Federal Prison Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. He was 57 years old. The cause of death was pneumonia. When they filled out the death certificate, someone had to write down his occupation. The man who sold the Eiffel Tower, who talked his way past Al Capone, who built a counterfeit operation and escaped a federal jail. The box on the form read, Apprentice Salesman. An apprentice, still learning, never finished, someone at the Missouri Federal Prison Medical Center, a clerk with a pen, filling out a form at the end of a shift, wrote those 2 words down for a man who had sold the Eiffel Tower to a scrap dealer and talked his way past Al Capone. The one thing Victor Lustig couldn't con was the record. In the end, the paper got the last word. A con man sold a national monument, and the only reason he got to try it twice was that his victim couldn't stand the embarrassment of saying it out loud. That's the case. If you see things other people miss, hit subscribe. Case Vault drops a new one twice a week, and the next crack is sharper than this one.